Today we welcome Dimitar Stanimiroff, a seasoned SaaS founder, operator and investor. He co-founded WePow, which was acquired, and Heresy, and helped scale Stack Overflow, Handshake and CrossBeam to over 100 million ARR. As an angel investor in B2B SaaS, he's backed Pitch.io, Lightdash and others from pre-seed to Series A. So it feels like founders are really obsessed by exit. It's something that we talk about a lot. There's kind of a whole mythology around it. You've seen it through, you've been through a few. What would be your sort of main takeaway from exit?
Okay, so as you probably picked up while reading my brief bio, I have been, in hindsight, lucky to experience both a positive exit and what you might call not so positive, if that makes sense. So what I mean by this is, you can sell your company, you can IPO. I've not been lucky enough to do that yet. You can sell to your existing team or investors, or you can just end up shutting down your business. So depending on which one of those options you go through, I think what you take away is going to vary significantly. And as you know, I've been, in hindsight, I say, lucky to have experienced a bit of both. So like somewhat of successful outcome in a company I co-founded, and another one which we ended up shutting down after 3.5 years of running it because we felt like it wasn't growing the way we wanted to. And sometimes that's the harsh reality of startup life.
And I think, as we talked about before separately, like, so the journey to success sort of isn't necessarily the first company you're in. It can be like sort of successes over a period of time. You could go through many companies.
Yeah.
But if we look today at kind of exit from a positive way in terms of it giving you some form of financial return, that kind of involves a few decisions around sort of, am I ready to sell? Is this the person to sell to? What do I do after? I think it'd be quite interesting to explore that. Yeah.
Full disclaimer, my biggest financial outcome, if you will, from an exit has been from a company I have worked for rather than co-founding my own. But getting into the position to be part of the exec team and even land that job in the first place came on the back of building a business before that. So there's a story there as well if you want to go down that route. But again, it wasn't my company that gave me the biggest financial return, if you will.
Yeah. Which is quite an interesting takeaway in itself.
Yeah.
But if we go, so take the first company then, the one that you sort of exited, that you had started. Perhaps you give a bit of context around that, and then sort of how you get to the point where you thought exit might be the right option.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is I just got very lucky to have a co-founder who I just did not get on with. And it's only a matter of time before you part ways. Just for the record as well, we did have a handful of co-founders. It wasn't just the two of us. That probably would have been much easier. It was a whopping 5, which is not something you come across often, and that presents its own challenges. But there was one particular co-founder who, dare I say, was somewhat toxic, and working with that individual was just not fun. And so, and you know how long you tend to grind when you're building an early stage company. So you're spending literally every single day, and sometimes late into the night with that person, and that's just not what you want to be doing. So from that standpoint, it was a fairly easy decision on one side, but on the other, because you have invested so much into getting to where you got to, it's difficult to walk away. And we have had this conversation in a previous episode. So that was challenging.
Because it feels like there's a big sunk cost there. It's kind of like you've put a lot of, almost the more you've sucked up to make it work, the more you feel, I've sucked up so much, can I not take a bit more?
And in this particular example, so this is my first company. It was called Ovia at the time. It's rebranded a bunch of times. The last name of the company was called WePow. We got acquired by Outmatch. Ovia was actually a pivot, if you will, of a previous business that we worked very hard on trying to stand up. That didn't work. And part of the technology, we ended up repurposing and standing something up that actually did take off. And so having had this kind of initial setback, I think makes you even more invested in the success and makes walking away harder.
So you do a business, doesn't quite work, you get and you suddenly got that traction and it's working really well. What is going through your mind at that stage where you kind of got sort of the business trajectory of sort of ever increasing and this kind of almost same time ever increasing personal costs or lack of enjoyment?
Yeah. I think the lack of enjoyment, unfortunately, you can endure for longer than you probably should. There's a bill that you eventually have to pay for that. But as I said, you do endure it for longer than healthy. I think in my personal case, we got, again, in hindsight, very lucky because we ended up raising money in the US. So we did 500 startups and then we raised in the US. And this is 2011, so 2010, 2011. And, during those days, if you raised in the US, you had to physically be in the US. I think this is actually coming back again, but obviously there was a big window where you could raise from US venture funds and be running your business from anywhere. That was not the case when we were building Ovia. And so we basically had to relocate. And then you're confronted with two kind of difficult decisions. One is continuing to endure what is a pretty unpleasant work environment, if you will. And the other one is doing that, miles away from home, leaving behind family, friends, and at the time, girlfriend, who ended up being my fiance and my wife and mother of my children. So, in hindsight, again, I keep on saying hindsight, but hindsight is 2020. It ended up working really well, but purely, I think, because of luck, I suppose, or the way things kind of panned out.
But I feel like it's such a big commitment that you've made. I mean, I just imagine that moment, like you've taken these huge steps in terms of you've gone again with the same founding team, you've stepped away from your own country, you've stepped away from your part, you've taken all these steps to really commit to this idea, and at the same time there's a sense of there's this big cost that I'm paying.
I mean, the answer is you would never know, right? Again, I'm looking back now, what is this, 15 years, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this worked really well. Who knows? It could be, it could have been in a different universe, could have been sat here pulling my hair out thinking, again, so I didn't make anything meaningful from the transaction. So, what ended up happening is myself and one of my other co-founders ended up being bought out after the Series A. And so at that point, the valuation is, it's not high by any means. But that was pretty much my first proper job out of university as well. So it's, it's meaningful for you at the time. But then the company continued to operate for, another 8 years or so, and eventually ended up being acquired. And if that, acquisition was, I don't know, in the multi, millions, billions, it was probably in the multi-millions, but not, nowhere near a billion, then probably I'll be sitting here pulling my hairs out thinking, oh my God, what have I done? But I don't think that was the case at all. And so,
but it's interesting that because let's say it had been a multi-million pound acquisition. I suppose the question is, even could you have sustained another 8 years of that? And if you had stayed there, would that have been its trajectory?
I don't know. I don't know. Could I have endured it for another 8 years? Maybe. Who knows? But again, things are so dynamic. You don't really think about this. At the time, I just knew that I was deeply unhappy. I had spent an awful lot of time building this, and I just could not see myself continuing, especially if I had to relocate.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was a pretty clear-cut decision. Or at least I say that now. At the time, I do remember kind of, thinking, should I do it? Should I not do it? Should I do it? Should I not do it? The one thing I do know very clearly is that the second I actually said, I'm leaving, I kind of felt like a burden was lifted off my shoulders. So it felt good. That's all I know.
So how did you then make this decision? So it sounds like it's a decision that lifted the weight.
Mm-hmm.
What was your process to get the decision? Was anyone involved in it? Was there anything that particularly gave you anything you'd recommend to other founders to do in this circumstance?
I got, years later, ironically, I got really good advice from Michael Pryor, who is a storied entrepreneur, one of the co-founders of Trello, who, my kill his quote here, but it was something along the lines of making sure that you really enjoy the journey, because the destination is never guaranteed, right? And so, if there's any advice I could give, is basically what Michael told me: make sure that the journey itself is fun and enjoyable, because you might never get to that outcome, right? And by the way, the journey is going to be brutal anyway, and so kind of fun is tricky, but make it as much fun as possible, right? At least surround yourself with people that you like.
Yeah, I'm just minded because we have another guest in the podcast called Freddie, and her whole theme was like, actually it should be fun.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's slightly indulgent, can feel like indulgent. Actually, fun leads to higher performance, more sustainability, greater creativity. Like it should not be a word we're scared of as well.
Yeah, totally. And things will be fun, but equally they will be very, very challenging. And I would reiterate this: make sure you surround yourself with people that you respect and you really enjoy working with, but also you like hanging around with.
But it feels like with any business, you're almost like making a series of like all-in decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, you are making bigger and bigger, and it feels like there's almost a time at each stage just go, actually, is this the right step for me? Do I want to go all in again? Like,
yeah.
Or is now the time to go, no, I'm going to take my chips off the table.
Yeah.
Even if there are not many chips or no chips, it's like, let's go and play with some other people on a different table, because actually it's going to be more fun and I might get a better result from it.
Yeah. Well, this is a good segue probably into the other company that I co-founded, which again, if you want to use the word exit loosely, I exited, but it was, we ended up shutting down the business. And that is a much harder decision, I think, to make. Because again, as an entrepreneur, you're kind of wired to see the bright side of things in many instances. You have to stay positive. You have to motivate your team. You have to, motivate yourself when, when things are kind of tough and you don't necessarily want to do the things that you have to do. And it's much more difficult, I would say, to actually pull the plug then and walk away. Quitting on time feels like quitting too early. And very often, when you're kind of in that kind of situation, you end up probably sticking around for a lot longer than you should.
Because you really do only have a certain amount of time, don't you, as a founder? And every year spent on one thing is a year not spent on something else. Yeah.
I've written about this with a slightly different analogy, which is thinking of your time as a stack of chips that you have on a poker table. And the idea is that if you keep on playing every single hand that you're dealt, no matter how good or bad it is, good is good. But if it's a bad hand, you should not keep on raising and committing. You should fold and wait for a better hand to be dealt. This is very much the same example. If you're in a situation where you've been dealt a bad hand for whatever reason, maybe things look great when you started, but for whatever reason, the market turned, it didn't work out, team members left, pick your reason. The most sensible thing you can do is to essentially quit whatever you're doing and start something else. It could be in the form of a pivot like we did in the first business. It could be completely shutting down and pursuing something else. But kind of sticking around, I think, is probably the one thing that if I had to do it all over again, I would not do. I would be more brutal and honest with myself and probably, I say that now, but try to quit earlier.
It's really interesting. Things for me, I did a business, I think probably around the time we met, called Going Bike. And around year 3 of that, we did it for 4 years before we shut it. Like, I think we'd probably, in retrospect, go, this is not going to work. Like, we'd done we'd won some awards, and we'd got like some partnerships, and it was looking like superficially looked really good. Yeah. But commercially, it just was not working. There were just some market things. And it still wouldn't work today. The crazy thing is, around that time, I did a startup weekend where you kind of launch, do like
old school weekend, yeah.
Awesome. But like, actually met this team of like, we had a front end developer, a back end developer. Someone was really good at marketing. But like, actually, as a team, had all the skills to do it. And we came up with this concept called EventLick, which was like pre-test events through pre-validate events. Actually, really cool idea. Subsequently, model was used elsewhere. And so actually on paper, that was a really great business to launch. Right. And we came up with a really cool concept during the thing, and it got really good feedback from people on it. But because I was committed to my other business, didn't pursue it. We got approached about funding to go on a startup accelerator. So it's kind of like all the signals you'd want from scratch to go, this is actually a really good thing, a really good team, good idea, funding, etc. didn't pursue it because was committed to a business that we probably should have stepped away from, which I think is
good lesson there.
But but like there's a cost, isn't there? I mean, the point is that is actually, it's not even like a theoretical cost. That is actually a very tangible cost.
Yeah.
So I really like the Stack thing because my chips are on something else.
Yeah.
They could well have been on something different.
Yeah. Talking of Stack, I think, Stack, I think, has had actually a pretty big part in shaping my entrepreneurial journey, the way I think, the way I act as an operator. And so this is another quote from Joel Spolsky, who was one of the founders of Stack Overflow, who I was very lucky to have as a personal mentor when we were building Heresy, my second company. And he was the one person who very early on told me, after discussing metrics and how we were progressing, that this is probably not worth pursuing. And this was probably like, I don't know, a few months after launching officially. And I at the time felt, whoa, this is way too early. But he was so persistent in saying, no, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. And it's not what you want to hear when you first launch. But he was right. And the brilliant thing he kept on telling me is that, he said, look, I've been around startups a long time. And the biggest mistake, a lot of my friends who are incredibly bright people, who have worked for Google for many years, some of the biggest tech companies, they're all very smart. But the one big mistake that they make is to confuse perseverance and grit with just investing in bad ideas. And, you would need the perseverance, you would need the grit, but it has to be on the right idea. And if you're not on, one of these kind of up into the right journeys, you should probably walk away. So that's a good one to think about.
The thing that triggered for me is a sense, often when you work with founders who are new managers, there's a sense of I can make anyone work within their team. It's kind of like, so people persevere with the wrong people in their team as well for too long. But actually, and they think they're doing it because they're supporting people, but often it comes down to ego. It's like not wanting to admit they're not good managers or they can't make anyone work.
Yeah.
And I just feel there's a correlation between this idea of like committing to the wrong thing for too long, probably because of ego. We tell ourselves for good reasons, perseverance, grit, sort of support of people, but ultimately a lot of it comes down to ego and not thinking we can't do it or have made a mistake.
Yeah, with startups, I think it's even harder because this being a founder, it's a big part of your identity. So shutting down the business, I kind of feel like it's almost like chopping off a limb. Very extreme and graphic, but it's that kind of thing where killing the business is kind of foregoing a big part of yourself, which is very, very difficult. With the hiring example, I totally agree with you. I think it's easier from just wearing my operator hat. If you inherit a big team, I think it's a lot easier to make that call than if you have hired someone. Then I think it becomes a little bit trickier, because you kind of feel like you owe people who you have brought on board, you have the moral duty to make them successful. But sometimes, and often, look, it could be that, you made a bad hiring decision, and to your point, you should basically come to terms with it and proceed accordingly. But I think often it's like, no, I can make it work. But I think that one it's easier compared to deciding to walk away from a business.
100%. I feel like people find that difficult, the sort of the higher bit difficult. So like walking away from a business is, even the language of that, cutting off a limb.
Yeah,
people talk about, like,
I'm sorry.
No, but people think, oh, it's like my business is my baby.
Yeah.
I mean, you're using that language. How can you possibly shut a business down? Because you are killing your way, even more graphic than a thing. So I think the language people use and the stories they tell really impact their ability to make decisions. Or my team is my family. Yeah. Well, you can't let your sister go.
I mean, this is, talking of which, this is probably the hardest thing. When we decided to start winding down Heresy, that was probably the hardest thing to do. Having to let go people that you convinced to join your team, who were happily employed elsewhere, and they kind of gave you the vote of confidence. You, the rest of the team, other co-founders. The idea. So that is probably the hardest thing. That, and also letting down customers who are paying and relying on your service, and you say, look, we've decided to shut down the business, and you've got 3 months to find another provider because we're going to completely pull the plug on this come April. So those are really, really tough decisions and hard conversations.
But interestingly, if you flip it the other way round, I think these things feel really hard, and they are hard. But your team will leave if better opportunities come up.
Yeah.
Often, your clients will leave if your service is thing, and they won't give you an extended notice period on your contract. So I sometimes feel we feel this guilt and this obligation, which can be quite one way.
Firstly, yes, at some point it will happen, but I think when that happens naturally, it shows that this individual has outgrown the team they're in, the company they're in. There's no more opportunity for them, right? And it's not a bad thing. I think we should be celebrating this, right? If they leave prematurely, at least in your kind of understanding of what that means, or mine, it will be due to you kind of failing them, I think, one way or another, right? You're not providing that way for them to grow further. They're deeply unhappy for whatever reason. You missed it, right? So I kind of feel like, yes, it can happen, but, it's on you when it happens. And if it happens when they have outgrown the business, then everyone is, I think, in a better place. And you shouldn't be forcing people to stay. So I left Stack Overflow, after, almost 5 years there, and I left to pursue another business idea I felt very passionate about. I didn't feel any less passionate about what Stack Overflow were doing at the time. I deeply believed in it. In fact, I was probably the biggest cheerleader for the business, from the sidelines. But I kind of felt like I had done my piece. I have built a strong enough business, which I felt would endure without me there, which it certainly did. And I just wanted to go and explore other things that I felt would make me happier. So...
But that's been quite a consistent trend for you, hasn't it? That sort of maintaining a positive relationship post.
Yeah.
And it also like your success, as you said, like your biggest financial success was not actually your own, but someone else's.
Yeah.
So it shows that ability to, I suppose, A, operate in different environments, but B, that your high quality team members can be super valuable.
Yeah.
Now that you've experienced both, what might your next thing be? Like if you're talking to other founders, would you recommend them try working for other people? Do you feel that's given you something different?
For me, certainly it has. But one thing I do know is that it's not for everyone, right? I think founders are kind of, strange animals, right? You've got people who are absolutely dead set on working for themselves and themselves only, and they self-aware enough, and they say, look, I can just not be managed. I have to be in charge, and this is who I am. There's nothing wrong with that. I know a handful of founders who fit that description, and I'm great friends with them. Would I like to be on the same team with them if we're peers and working together under someone else? Probably not. And I don't think, and they were the first one to raise their hand and say that is the case, right? So if you're like that, then it's probably not a good idea to go and work for someone else. Because I don't think that will make you happy. I don't think it will make you productive, and I don't think it will be a good relationship with whoever company you end up joining. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I approached it differently. I never had an issue necessarily with authority or being my own boss, that kind of stuff. For me, it's always been about working on something that I believe in, right? And often it could be something that you're very passionate about, and for whatever reason it doesn't exist, and you decide that you're going to go and create it. But equally, the businesses that I have been lucky to work for, I have deeply believed in. I've said, I really like this idea. It's not my idea, but I would embrace it very much like my own, and I'll give it my all to make it happen. And so if you're like that, I think then absolutely go and do that. But if you're more in the former camp, which is, look, I have to run the ship here, I think you would probably way more happy and more productive, and you would have better outcomes if you pursue your own individual path and stay co-founder, CEO, or just running your own thing.
Do you feel that you're unusually pragmatic for a founder then, in terms of this ability to sort of take a step back and make these kind of sensible decision, inverted commas, like time to exit? Kind of, let's say with your second, but like you had money on the table to like go again, but it wasn't like you didn't have the option to continue. How How do you feel you're able to take the step back and make these more emotionless decisions in quite sort of emotionally charged times?
I don't know. I wish I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm like super pragmatic. I think, I'm just like everyone else. A lot of these decisions are driven by emotions, and it's even more true when you're in it. Again, I can talk about it theoretically now, now that I'm kind of removed away from the situation, and the wounds have somewhat healed. But it's never an easy decision, right? And again, with the example I gave you with Heresy, where we ran the company for 3.5 years, I think the writing was on the wall, and you can start feeling it probably 2 years in, right? Maybe 2.5 years in. And I think I mentioned this last time we spoke, what made it somewhat easier, I think, to realize is, again, I had just come out of Stack Overflow, which was growing like mad. And so I had been very fortunate to see what this sort of proverbial hockey stick growth looks like, right? And everyone is chasing that. And so 1 year, 2 years in, you're not seeing it. You might decide to stick around and look in their companies like, I can't really think of a good example here, but Figma is a great example, where it took them actually a long time to kind of go up and to the right. And once they did, boy, watch them grow. And that could happen. But again, I kind of felt like we were missing the mark there. And going back to the
chips
analogy, kind of, that's kind of in the back of my head. And then I've got Joel, kind of saying, it's been 6 months, it's been a year. Oh shit, it's clock's ticking. The other thing which I mentioned when we last spoke is that my personal life changed a lot. So my risk appetite, you might say, decreased significantly. When we started Heresy, it was me and my co-founder, and it was me and my wife in my personal life. And by the time we shut down the company, I had 2 kids under 2. You're a father, you know what that kind of can do to your life. And so when you have that as well on, in the balance, it just makes the other piece a lot more easier to kind of hit home and be like, okay, this is just not working, and move on.
So almost, if we say there's a finite amount of chips that you've got to play with, it feels like suddenly when you have these other dependents or something, the value of the game suddenly spikes as well.
Yeah. The buy-ins essentially, jump like tenfold. Yeah.
Well, this made me thinking. Is that I'm still really bad at poker. Like I really, I really can't resist the constant buying. I don't like not playing.
Yeah.
Which why I'm really bad at it. But I do think it's a nice analogy though, because it's kind of like there's so many elements you can't control, but you do only have a certain amount. You start with a certain amount of chips.
Yeah.
You can win more.
Yeah.
Not in terms of time, but I suppose money can buy you more time and more resources and more opportunities.
Yeah. I think in poker, and I'm not a good poker player by any means. Decent, I'd like to think, but I think it's way more about the hands that you choose not to play versus the ones you play, right? And again, if you're throwing chips at every single hand you're dealt with, that's a guaranteed way to be off the table in a very short period of time.
But it sounds like also going in with a sense of what does working look like?
Yeah.
Because it feels like the Stack Overflow experience and your mentor gave you a very clear sort of paradigm for this is a 2 king starting point hand. You should play this.
Yeah.
If there's another king, this you can continue.
Yeah.
If you're still sitting on a king, a 2 and a 3 after 3 cards, maybe think about folding. But definitely put like a 4 on the table at that stage.
Yeah.
Time to go.
Yeah.
You talked about that profile of growth. Is there anything else that you think after 3 years, 2 years, you haven't seen? It's time to maybe fold and not play the hand.
I mean, the growth is essentially sort of the tip of the iceberg, if you will. There's a lot more things that kind of go underneath to produce that growth, right? So, but if you were to pick the one thing that would be the telltale sign, I would say is that at least for me. And again, look, we had raised venture funding, so we raised $1 million for Heresy on the back of a deck. And so there's big expectations riding on you. And, with every single milestone that you hit, people are kind of cheering and celebrating. But at some point, the milestones, at least for me, felt like they plateaued, right? And they weren't so meaningful, right? So, and maybe you can, I'm kind of looking back, maybe we could have raised more money earlier on. Maybe we got greedy and we felt like, 1 million is enough to basically get us from deck to idea customers, and then to over, a certain threshold of annual recurring revenue. I don't know. But the one thing I do know is that it felt like everything kind of started plateauing, and the joy of actually building and pursuing that idea just disappeared. And again, you raise venture money, you're chasing venture returns, both for yourself and for your investor, and investors, and you have to be honest with yourself. I think, and this is, I think, the best thing for investors as well, ironically. But I think sometimes when you're, again, so committed, you're pushing the startups because it's a sunk cost, right? You're like, you have to keep going, and the truth is, not necessarily. I'd rather preserve. And I can speak this, I can say this as an investor as well. I've had like a bunch of startups, just one this week, by the way, who emailed and said, look, we've pursued this for, 3 years as well. It's not working. We actually tried to raise as well. We spoke to, 50, 60 VCs. No one is willing to write us a check. We're folding the business. That's the right thing to do. I've had other companies who have folded way earlier, purely because they felt like they were not hitting the milestones that they wanted to hit, and they said, look, have the money back. We're going to go and do something else. I think that's perfectly normal.
So I think this has been really good, but I think what I've taken from this is the sense of exit can be positive or negative, but that can also just be of the moment. Like a negative exit can also lead to positive stuff. Like, you've only got so many chips.
Yeah.
Don't waste them on the wrong hand. And actually, if the hand's not only bringing you that sort of growth curve, but then there's also like a feeling to it as well. Like, if it's not bringing you joy, if you're not enjoying the people on the journey with, maybe this is not the hand, this is not the game, and that's okay, because there are going to be lots of other, like, there will be other opportunities.
Yeah, if you take this as your guiding principles, if you will, I think it would make it a lot more easier to walk away from these proverbial bad hands, the kind of clenching on, because you expect that there will be a financial incentive further down the line. And I've seen this so many times, and this is both with founders but also with employees and kind of managers in kind of big tech companies that are private. So many people, I think, kind of have wasted. I don't say it lightly, by the way, but I know personal friends of mine who have wasted, I feel like, so much time kind of holding on, waiting for an IPO when this IPO is never going to happen, right? But you're wearing your rose-tinted glasses and you're like, no, it will happen. The market just needs to turn. And in the meantime, again, you could have started your own business. You could have joined another company which is actually on path to IPOing. And so, it's, keep on circling back and coming to the chips. Don't waste your chips on bad hands. Is the one single thing that if you were to take anything out of this conversation, I would say is that.